High temperatures this weekend in the low to mid 80s with at least a chance of a shower.
Each late spring and early summer of the year, Kansans look apprehensively toward the sky.
Meteorologist Brittany Foster, she's going to have another look at those storm chances. That is coming up. Udall, Heston, Andover, Greensburg. Kansas has an unfortunate history when it comes to devastating and deadly tornadoes. But it also has an untold history when it comes to the origin of a life-saving tornado technology, a tool that got its start right here in the heartland. Just a year after the end of World War II, the U.S. Weather Bureau wanted to try out a new wartime technology, radar. Airborne radars intended for hunting U-boats and navigating warplanes were headed to the Great Plains and beyond. What the military knew as the APS-2 was modified for ground use, renamed Weather Surveillance Radar 1. And number 1 was installed in Wichita in 1947, making Wichita the first weather bureau to have its own weather radar. The early days of weather radar were primitive, black and white, and messy. It wasn't until the early 1950s that meteorologists saw their first hook echo and made the connection between it and a confirmed tornado. Some radars had built-in cameras to capture images, while others relied on the steady hand of the operator to trace the cells. Just as they did at Tinker Air Force Base, the night of May 25, 1955. As forecasters tracked the storm that would ravage the town of Udall, Kansas, and kill nearly 90.
Families were separated, friends lost. There was no source for human facts, no way to know where people were or how they had fared. Only a tormenting void for the survivors.
Despite being primitive, this new technology was working, but these radars were just seeing storms. Let me show you. A pulse of energy is sent from the radar. When it hits a thunderstorm, part of that energy is reflected back to the radar, hence the term echo. It's then plotted like you see here. But meteorologists wanted to know more. They wanted to know what was happening inside of the storm. And for that, they needed a different type of radar. They needed Doppler. In the simplest of terms, Doppler radar can detect the wind speed and direction of objects in a storm. They believed if they could detect the wind speeds, they could also detect a tornado. So they acquired more Navy surplus, and an experimental program was formed. They placed the radar on top of a trailer. They parked one of these units in Wichita Falls, Texas, and the other in Wichita, Kansas. For over a year, they scanned the Kansas sky without success. It wasn't until June of 1958 when the pattern was perfect. A surface front was draped across the state of Kansas. Warm, moist conditions with cooler air aloft. The atmosphere was unstable and primed for severe weather. 3:40 p.m. Meteorologists at the Weather Bureau office in Wichita observe a towering cumulus cloud 34 miles northwest of Wichita. 4:30. The Weather Bureau issues severe thunderstorm forecast number 127. Isolated hail and high wind gusts for south central Kansas. 4:40. The storm is moving east at a rate of 20 miles per hour. 4:50. The radar operator in Wichita notices a hook echo on the scope. 5 o'clock. Highway Patrolman Robert Lemon reports for duty. He notes that the sky, quote, looked very ugly with thunder and lightning in the distance, heavy clouds, rather still surface conditions, and very hot. 5:20. 3-inch hail in Whitewater. The storm was starting to turn to the southeast. At an azimuth of 30 degrees, the operators aimed the double-dish Doppler radar at the hook producing storm. 5:29. Observers on the ground report a long white funnel that ultimately makes contact with the ground. The data, recorded on magnetic tape, and plotted on a spectrum revealed wind gusts of over 200 miles per hour. They got their first tornado. For the first time ever, a tornadic storm was hit with Doppler radar. "5:55. A survivor reported the tornado pumped down from the cloud on the outskirts of El Dorado. He saw the tornado pump down to the ground while the cloud was over the Midian substation. He reported each successive pumping action lowered the funnel until it contacted the ground. When he saw it touch the ground, he and his family went to the basement of their home that was destroyed 2 minutes later."
El Dorado, Kansas received the brunt of a tornado just this year of 1958. About 14 were killed and some 100 were injured, many of them seriously so.
Did you have pretty good forewarning, or did you see it coming, or just what happened?
We saw it coming. Any estimate of the time that you might have been off the ground?
No, just a minute and it was over, that was all.
When did you first hear about the tornado, that it was coming?
Well, we were the ones who seen it.
You were the first ones to see it? Doctor, how long have you been working here at the hospital this evening?
Well, I was here when it broke, about 6 o'clock. But we've sent a number of the fractures to Wichita because, you know, we got no power.
No sirens, no weather radios, no special reports on TV. Doppler came at a cost. The highly visible tornado quickly carved a path of destruction through El Dorado, Kansas. The tornado likely producing wind speeds of over 200 miles per hour. 13 people killed. Over 80 would be injured. Around 200 homes destroyed. While it occurred before the Fujita scale, by today's standard, it would likely be rated an EF5.
Have you seen tornadoes at work before?
I've never saw one or been close to one. It's the first funnel I even saw before.
Now, I understand you saw it out in the northwest and therefore didn't think that it would come this way. Is that
That's
correct?
right.
This tornado evidently was taking a path somewhat foreign to what they usually do.
Doppler radar couldn't save the people of El Dorado that night. The data, it wouldn't be analyzed until after the storm had passed. And the findings, well, they wouldn't be published until the early 1960s. In fact, it would be decades until it was refined into the technology that it is today, a tool we use on TV, and chances are you have in your pocket. Doppler weather radar, the most powerful tornado detection tool, got its start at this very spot as a deadly tornado roared into El Dorado June 10th of 1958.
During 1958, the KAKE Television News Department shot over 124,000 feet of film, which included more than 1,100 stories. The film that you've seen today is but symbolic of the many, many stories we've covered throughout the year in trying to bring a public service to the community of Wichita and the surrounding territory. Thank you for your time.
Well, her life was flipped upside down 18 years ago. That's when Carrie Rawson learned that her dad, Dennis Rader, was a serial killer.
It was signed with the initials BTK.
The BTK story goes back to January of 1974.
In April of 74.
March of 1977.
We're dealing with a person who is perverted, a person that is sick.
I still can't believe it. It's very nerve-wracking to know that he was that close.
The bottom line, BTK is arrested.
We never talked to the KPI, but Wichita, I think they just knew we were absolutely in shock and torn apart, and they didn't need us. But now we're realizing, well, did they miss some things? You know, did the KBI and the FBI miss some things? And so all I have ever wanted to do was help.
Do you think they did miss things?
But did detectives make mistakes when Rader was convicted? Did they miss other people who have fallen victim to BTK? That's what Rawson says she's determined to find out. And she speaks exclusively, as you see there, with KAKE's Annette Lawless about the new investigations and seeing her father for the first time in years.
We had tried to keep this quiet and just keep working investigations because we didn't want to upset families.
Right.
And like until we absolutely have an answer of like finding a body or finding evidence. The reality is like everything blew up when they dug up the yard.
It's these images that flipped yet another page in Carrie Rawson's story. This summer and spring, investigators digging into her family's old property over in Park City, trying to tie her dad, Dennis Rader, to cold cases. Mysteries like Cindy Kinney, a teenager who simply vanished from Oklahoma in the 70s. Rader was working nearby.
Kinney was abducted from a laundromat in Pawhuska, and I was like, that doesn't match my dad at all, right? Because my dad did home invasions. All of his 7 crime scenes, 10 cases, they're all home invasions. You know, and like there were 2 that he switched the MO by our house, and he did it because they were by our house, but still, they're still home invasions. And I was like, I don't think that was Dad.
However, a sheriff from Oklahoma thinks otherwise. Re-examining an old journal of Rader's, he titles one entry, Bad Wash Day, writing, "The brunette was the target. I would watch the nearby laundromat for possible victim. The question, is this writing coming from fact or fantasy?" Rader claims he had attempted kidnappings before his first known victims, the Otero family. Julie, Joseph, and their kids 9-year-old Joey and 11-year-old Josie, they died in January 1974. Down in Oklahoma, the 16-year-old Cindy was last seen 2 years after that, directly across the street from where Rader was on the job.
He talks about attempted kidnappings other times. And so if you really start digging in there, there's like so many concerns.
It's a tough reality for Carrie, writing a memoir a few years ago, facing the headline that has taken over her life. She is a serial killer's daughter. Her dad admitted to the deaths of 10 people, but are there more? That's what's brought her back to the heartland several times this year. Detectives driving her to different places, like over in Missouri, and a moment she did not expect.
And we were driving, and we came upon this like small creek, and it was flowing pretty good, and it has like white shell rock all around it. And I go, wait, stop. I said, we fished here. I think I literally have a photo of me fishing there like around 4. Now it could be somewhere else, but it's like that really bright white shell rock, and it looks exactly like there. And I said, wait, I know I have fished this stream. And I said, that's not good. And then they go, okay, well, just wait a second. And they drive about another couple blocks, half a mile, and they turn on this old country road that's steep. And I go, I know this road. And then that's where I got real sick again. And I shouldn't know that road, right? It doesn't make any sense. And then we drive just up a little bit and they're like, this is where Shauna was dumped.
A plot twist. Some believe her dad is responsible for the murder of Shauna Garber. The 22-year-old's body was found in the winter of 1990. She was raped, strangled, and restrained, fitting that BTK MO, bind, torture, kill. Shauna's remains were discovered not far from where Carrie says her family would visit when she was little.
When that became familiar to you, what was your feeling?
I was like not well, but I also was like, we have a dad problem. That's what I've been calling him internally.
Yeah.
I'm like, we have a dad problem. Like, you're looking at the bondage, or you're looking at the drawings, or you're matching these things, or you're like seeing a creek that you fished at that's around the corner from where a body was dumped. And you're like, okay, that's a bad dad fact. And so those are adding up.
Yet Carrie is determined to know the truth and make sure nothing was missed. Not just for her, but for all the families involved. She's been visiting prison to help with the investigations, to speak with a man she has not seen in nearly 20 years.
And now all of a sudden, it's like everything has just sort of come to this peak moment of where it was like, I'm strong enough, capable enough, I can go help.
Sitting across the table from her dad, a new chapter. A once tall, strong man is declining. No teeth, legs wrapped up, in handcuffs, and a wheelchair. Quite the contrast of the controlling dad she once knew. At the same time, realizing the person across from him is also quite different. As she continues to write her story of survival.
Going in to see my dad, it's insane, but it's also really empowering because I get time with him. We're working on these investigations. You know, at times he's very difficult and I have to get him to focus. Other times he's cooperative. Like, I hug him, he kisses me on the cheek. I say goodbye. He's in shackles. He's in a wheelchair. Like, he's tiny. He's like lost like 9 inches. It's really hard to see him. I get to choose when I go see him again, and I get to choose. And so it's like I've now taken control over that man that was in my house. You know, like, I'm the person that's tall now. I'm the person that can walk. I'm the person that's literally like in charge.
Well, Rawson visited her father for the 3rd time this year, but she says she can't share what happened in that conversation. So far, Rader says he is innocent. However, he has speculated as to what happened to those victims. Investigators are looking into what he's said. You can see our team coverage of these investigations and extended interviews by visiting our website, KAKE.com.
Just a week ago, the Wichita Police Department closed the case of a murdered Wichita woman from 1989, a case that had sat cold for more than 30 years.
Tonight, KAKE's Hannah King looks at how police finally solved the Krista Martin murder.
She lost her life here in such a violent way. Hey guys, it's Mary Ann. We're here to discuss the 30 years unsolved murder of Krista Martin.
And who is she?
Krista Martin. Krista Martin lived next door to us. Krista and I were more like tomboys, and so we just, right from the moment we met, we just got along. We were both kind of goofy, kind of nerdy people.
A year older than Marianne McCullough, Krista Martin is a friend she'd never forget.
I mean, Krista has continued to affect my life since I was a child.
In October of 1989, 20-year-old Krista Martin was found beaten to death in her apartment on South Osage in Wichita. It was a place she had recently moved into. Police say she was dealt a fatal blow after being struck in the back of the head with a blunt object. That murder weapon still hasn't been found. Many details remain unknown, but Marianne, a true crime podcast host, vowed to do anything to find out what she could.
So right now you've started this podcast.
Yes. In 2013, I had a stroke. And I had to reassess everything in my life. And I sat there and I thought, what am I going to do? I thought, I cannot leave this world without knowing who killed Krista. I can't.
Was I supposed to expect you guys to share her case when you know nothing about her?
Who would think a woman with a lisp and the most annoying voice in the world could ever do a podcast? But I decided to do it. And I thought, I need to do this. I need to do this to get her voice out there because she can't speak for herself. And that's what I did.
She spent years searching Krista Martin's name, but never found anything new. Mary Ann felt alone and isolated, pleading Krista deserves so much more.
When it comes to Krista herself, I feel very alone. And I'm not upset for me about it. I'm upset for her. Because she deserves more than that.
There was an incident at Krista's home a week prior to her death. It was a domestic dispute, but it's unclear if Krista was involved.
All we know is one man was tall and the other man was short. I have been requesting Krista's information from the Wichita Police Department over the span of multiple years, and I've heard no information back.
So I can find out that one thing. That one answer that keeps me up at night. Who killed Krista Martin?
It's a rough drive over.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it. Sorry.
She continues to voice her frustrations online, but one place she avoids is where Krista once called home.
This is the second time I've been here in 30 years. My life would not be the life it is without her. And yet, I feel like I've let her down because her life ended here. And I wasn't there.
You're here now, making a difference in the ways that you know how. You haven't let it go.
How can you expect a community to get involved in a case and give you any tips? I mean, you need a little bit more from the police department to get involved. And it's platforms like these that I think truly make the difference.
Who do you think has these answers? You know, friends, family, people who were with her that night?
I believe that the core of it lies with the people who were with her that night at Toto's.
And after that conversation with Mary Ann, we got a call that would change the entire story.
We won't give you all the details right now, obviously, because we will have to release it all at the same time, but he wants you to know that we have met with Mark Bennett, and Mark Bennett has agreed that we will charge a suspect on this case that we've identified. Unfortunately, the suspect is deceased. The FBI was involved, we were involved, the DA's office is involved.
Well, I certainly appreciate you giving me this. I really do appreciate it. It's awesome that, you know, you all have someone named and you've been, you know, you didn't forget about it. It's been 30 years.
Yeah, I can tell you that her biggest advocate, her biggest supporter to this point in time has been her niece, has been the one that's been, you know, pushing and prodding, if you will, the police department along the way, you know, like, hey, what's going on? What's the status of it?
That's amazing. Okay. Thank you so much, and thank you for being transparent, for your honesty, and for looking out for us.
Not a problem, and I appreciate your advocacy on Krista's behalf and on all of our colleagues.
And that was a call from Detective Vandermolen, who's been working the case since 2020.
You finally have a resolution.
Mm-hmm.
What? Just tell me.
We found an individual who lived in Wichita in 1989, and shortly after the murder of Krista Martin, October of '89, this individual up and left Wichita and went back to Arkansas. He lived around the corner from Krista Martin. I drove it one day, and it's 6 houses from Krista Martin's house where she was murdered at. And I was like, this is crazy. And it gives me goosebumps to talk about because it was there. We just didn't know it until, you know, a couple months ago.
What was there, though, was a family tree and a DNA profile of a potential suspect.
We use genetic genealogy on this case. It's kind of a big buzzword right now in law enforcement and across the country. This was one of the first 2 cases that we opened up with genetic genealogy in the Wichita Police Department. This was the first homicide that we looked at through that lens, and so that wasn't available back in '89. So it was down to one of two guys in that family. The guy that lived around the corner or a brother of his ultimately found that the suspect, I should say, of Krista Martin's case, his name is Paul Hart.
Is he 100% the person that did this?
I'm very confident that he is the individual that it was involved in this murder.
So now when you pulled this photo out and you're looking at her, what would you tell her?
I'd tell her that we finally caught the guy that did this to her and that she didn't deserve to get what happened to her. Then no one deserves that, you know, but she was in her own home, just young, 20 years old, enjoying life. And for what reason? You know, doesn't make sense to me.
Weeks after that conversation, a conference was held with what so many wanted to hear and what so many wanted to say.
Finally, in April of 2023, a possible suspect, Paul Hart, emerged. It was discovered Mr. Hart died in a traffic collision in Memphis, Tennessee in March of 1999. WPD investigators were able to utilize IgG techniques to confirm that Mr. Hart was the suspect in the 1989 homicide of Krista Martin.
My name is Ember Moore, and I'm the firstborn niece to Krista Martin. I first became involved with Krista's case in 2009 when I turned 21, which also happened to be the 20th anniversary of her death. I am glad we can finally move forward and have peace knowing that Krista's murderer is not walking around free or amongst us. Again, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to everyone involved in bringing justice to Krista's case. She deserves so much more out of this life than what she ended up with.